Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Daria Hall. I am a board member with xMinds and also the chair of our BIPOC committee. I'm very happy. In a minute, I will be introducing our guest for the evening, Dr. Mai Phan, who is going to talk to us about stress on the spectrum. I hope everyone survived and made it through their Thanksgiving holiday. I know folks have probably some really great plans coming up for December as well. And we hope that this will be an addition to your arsenal as you're looking to create safe spaces for your child or as a caregiver to someone who is on the spectrum. Before we get started, a few quick ground rules that are fairly typical for us here at xMinds. And for any new members, new community folks joining us tonight, I think it's important just to start with who we are. xMinds is a nonprofit organization for parents and educators who want to improve education for autistic students in Montgomery County, Maryland. We will have been around for, I think it's 15 years come next year. So we have a big milestone coming up. And we thank each and every one of you all for supporting our programming. We hope tonight, like our other programming, is really helpful to you. As many of you know, our programming is free and open to everyone. We appreciate all the good feedback and support you all show us throughout the year. So community guidelines. This session is being recorded. Feel free to turn off your video if that is more comfortable. Please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat. We are monitoring and keeping our eye out, as well as our presenter. And we promise that we will have a Q&A session towards the end of our presentation tonight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. So tonight we are joined by Dr. Mai Phan, a postdoctoral research at Children's National Hospital in the Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders. Dr. Phan has over a decade of experience in stress and hormone research and combines this expertise with studies on puberty and mental health research in autistic youth. She is a mother of 4, 3 of whom are diagnosed with various intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism. Dr. Phan calls her family very neurodiverse. She's a longstanding autism community advocate and recently an autism self-advocate as a late diagnosed woman. She brings both lived experience and professional perspectives to her advocacy work, aiming to reduce disparities, especially in marginalized communities. She has a BS in psychology from the University of New Orleans, shout out to New Orleans, and an MS and PhD in human development family studies from Iowa State University. Her website, JennyMaiPhan.com, has a wealth of resources where you can learn a little bit more about her and what her work entails. And so with that said, I am happy to pass the mic over to Dr. Phan. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Daria, for that introduction. I'm very honored to be here and to present today and just really launch a discussion about stress and autism. It's something that is also very near and dear to my heart because I feel like I live stress as a mother of 4. And just my experience with not knowing that I was autistic and then learning late in life that I actually am, and then going through the process of getting a diagnosis. But before all of that, my research background, as Daria introduced, is largely in stress research, not in autism, but stress research in the general population. I want to also say really quickly, in case I cough, because I do have asthma and I sometimes cough when I talk, so I apologize in advance. Okay, so can everyone see the slide okay? Just want to double check. Great, okay. Feel free to put any questions that may come up in the chat. I know that it's going to be monitored and we'll get to it at the end, I promise. But if you're thinking of a question, pop it into the chat and we'll go through it at the end. So just some broad overview of what to anticipate for today's discussion topic. I'll provide some contexts and general descriptions of stress and responses to stress. This will help with identifying it in ourselves that then will enable us to better identify causes of stress in our autistic children and teens. Then I'll go into how stress might look differently in autistic children compared to neurotypical children. Next, I'll talk about the impact of different types of stress on young people's physical and mental health. And lastly, I'll end with some information about how to work with your child to overcome feelings of stress in their everyday life. All right, so let's buckle up because we're about to have a bonding experience. One thing that connects us all, besides that we share the same species as humans, is that stress is universal. See, it's ingrained in the world map. All right, so let's do a quick poll. Where are you joining us from? Where in Maryland? You can either scan the QR code on the screen or you can click on the link that Daria will pop into the chat really quickly. And you can just fill out that survey and it'll pop up a word cloud for us to see where you're joining us from. Okay, and there's the link in the chat. Okay, we're just waiting on people to put in their responses. If you're not able to access the link, you can also put it in the chat. Okay, so in the chat, I see some people from Silver Spring, Maryland, North Potomac, Maryland, Baltimore, Olney, Germantown, Damascus, Sykesville, Fairfax, Virginia, California. All right. Williamstown, New Jersey, Prince George's County. Awesome. Please continue to put it in the chat. I guess the link is not working, but I'm glad we have chat to do this. Okay. So I'm going to ask a question. Have you ever heard of the saying, happy wife, happy life? Or the saying, it's not happy wife, happy life, it's happy spouse, happy house. So the latter saying encompass the household rather than the happiness of only one member of the family. Does anyone here have the experience of a household of more than 3 people living under the same roof? One member of the family is unhappy, and then that unhappiness maybe spreads to other members of the family. So let's try to think of happiness in another way for a moment. Does happy mean there's no stress? How about does stress mean there's unhappiness? So these two concepts can be mutually exclusive, meaning that they can both happen simultaneously. However, like a recipe for a turducken or souffle, it's not that simple. Here we have one drop of water causing a ripple effect. This drop of water is stress, disrupting the quiet, still water of happiness. Happiness can still exist as the ripple effect begins to disappear. See, mutually exclusive. What if there are more drops of water or stress, causing multiple ripple effects, leading to disrupted happiness? Can happiness still exist? It's arguable at this point that happiness could be dwindling down. So when stress takes over multiple parts of our lives, it can become harder to see the happiness underneath those ripples, but it's still there because ripples can fade and the still waters are under them. So let's keep this analogy in mind through today's discussion. Some questions for us to reflect on. Is stress bad? Can stress be protective? Can stress be contagious? Can we avoid stress that might be contagious? Let's keep these questions in mind because you might form an informed answer by the end of the day. Okay, so warning, these images may cause stress at the sight of these predators. Not to worry. These are 2D images and the animals will not leap out of the pictures. What do you usually think of when the word stress comes up? Is it in the context of a forest or plains with tigers, lions, or bears chasing you? I'm going to take a guess and say, nah. Instead, the context is usually social in nature, such as how we interact with the environment or how the environment interact with us. Or maybe it's health related. These are contexts that many of us are likely better able to relate to and with other people, not in a forest or the plains. Now that you're all warmed up, perhaps you're here today because you want to know whether stress looks different in autism. Well, you're in the right class. All right, there's a lot to unpack here with the different types of stress responses. So I'll lay out some typical stress responses and then a few that are commonly seen in autism. But first, Lyric Rivera is also known as Neurodivergent Rebel on social media. They put together this neat graphic in terms that we use in general when describing stress response, and then terms that describe stress responses in autistic people. And there's a link to Lyric's website if you want to read some of their work. You'll get a copy of the slides after today. So it's important to note that stress responses look similar because of our shared human experiences. But where differences lie, it's in the behavioral manifestation of stress responses that are potentially linked to differences in neurology and neural functioning between autistic and neurotypical people. Let's break down what stress responses can look like. So, what does fight look like as a stress response? It could look like physical aggression towards others, yelling or crying, relational aggression, assertiveness, competitiveness, verbal attacks, breaking things, resistance to change, or self injury. In autism, it can look like melting down, which some of these examples might apply. How about flight? What does that look like? It can look like physical withdrawal or running away, avoiding conflict or abandoning, procrastination, social withdrawal, distracting behaviors or deflecting, or minimizing risks. In autism, that can look like eloping or bolting. For freeze, it could look like mental stagnation or stonewalling, physical immobility, literally freeze, dissociation, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, passivity, or shutting down in autism. And then lastly, fawn can look like people pleasing, difficulty saying no, over accommodating behavior, seeking approval, conflict avoidance, self sacrifice, or behaviors that usually reflect camouflaging or masking in autism. Here's some additional questions to ponder on to add to our reflections. Can stress and coping look the same? Is it really that different in autistic people compared to neurotypical people? Can there be concurrent stress responses, meaning two or more kinds of stress responses happening at the same time? As you think on those questions, I'm going to expand on each of the stress responses. Starting with fight, the fight stress response. That includes verbal confrontation. That's responding to stress with arguments, raised voice, or verbal assertiveness. This can include defending yourself in a discussion or actively engaging in debates. It can look like physical aggression. In some cases, the fight response can manifest as physical aggression or physical stance in a response to a threat. This is more common in situations where a person feels physically threatened. There's assertiveness. This is standing up for oneself in a situation, asserting one's rights, opinions, or needs in a direct and forthright manner. Then there's control seeking behavior. This is an attempt to gain control over a situation or others as a means to manage stress or anxiety. This can include taking charge in group settings or situations. And then there's competitiveness. This is an exhibition of strong desire to win or be the best, especially in stressful situations where one feels challenged or threatened. And then there's resistance to change, which is opposing changes that are perceived as threatening or stressful. Next, we have flight. This includes physical withdrawal, a moving away from the source of stress or threat. For example, a person might physically leave a room or area where they feel threatened or overwhelmed. And then there's avoiding conflict, choosing not to engage in situations that are perceived as confrontational or stressful, such as avoiding arguments or difficult conversations. And then there's procrastination. This is a delaying or avoiding tasks or decisions that are perceived as stressful or overwhelming. Social withdrawal. This is avoiding social interactions or events or situations that may cause anxiety or discomfort. With distracting behaviors, this is engaging in activities that divert attention away from the stressor, such as excessive screen time, overindulgence in hobbies, or other forms of escape. And then there's minimizing risk. This is choosing paths or decisions that are perceived as safer or less likely to lead to confrontation or stress. Next, we have freeze. Mental stagnation. This is experiencing an inability to think clearly or make decisions during high stress situations. It's like the mind freezes under pressure. Physical immobility, a literal freezing or stillness in the body. So, for example, a person might find themselves unable to move or speak when confronted with a stressful event. Dissociation is a detachment from the present moment or feeling disconnected from one's body or surroundings. This can be a psychological defense mechanism to cope with overwhelming stress. Hypervigilance, being frozen in a state of heightened alertness, constantly scanning the environment for potential threats. Emotional numbness, which is a feeling detached from emotions or experiencing a temporary inability to feel anything, often as a protective response to overwhelming stress or trauma. Passivity is showing a lack of proactive behavior or a tendency to be passive in situations where action might be expected or required. And then we have fawn. This includes people pleasing, constantly trying to keep others happy, often at the expense of one's own needs or feelings. And this includes agreeing with others even when disagreeing internally. Difficulty saying no. Can anyone relate? This is a struggle to set personal boundaries. I saw in the chat, setting personal boundaries is a self-care. I love that. I think that's very important for many of us. But difficulty saying no to these boundaries is due to fear of upsetting others or causing conflict. There's over accommodating behavior, which is going above and beyond to help or support others, even when it is not asked of the person or at the detriment of one's well being. Then there's seeking approval. This is excessively seeking validation or approval from others as a way to feel safe or included. For conflict avoidance, it's avoiding confrontations, disagreements, or expressing true feelings to maintain harmony or avoid potential rejection. And then there's self sacrifice. This is putting others' needs and desires before one's own, often leading to neglect of personal health, interests, or aspirations. All right. I hope this poll works because the last one didn't. If this doesn't work, maybe you can put your answers in the chat. So this question is asking everyone here, can you rate your current stress level? Um, and, and Daria, just put the link in the chat, so hopefully it will work. But if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Feel free to put your responses in the chat. So there's two questions. The first is, if you can rate your current stress level, what would you rate it as? And the choices are not at all stressed, somewhat stressed. It's working, yes. Okay. Neutral, pretty stressed, very stressed. We got some pretty stressed people here. We got some very stressed people attending tonight. Some neutral and some somewhat stressed. Okay. And then there's another question. So the next question is, let me click on here. There we go. What is your usual type of stress response? So you all beat me to it. Whether it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Okay. We're seeing a lot of fawn, and then freeze, and then flight, and then fight. Interesting. Okay. Now that you have identified your stress response, keep this in mind as you learn more throughout tonight. Okay, so I started all of us off with the act of stress response. Now I want to pull us back a little to now think about those stress responses within the context of types of stress. Hopefully that's not confusing. This really got me all mixed up when I was learning this during my PhD, but I'll do my best. So first we have one type of this first type of stress, which is acute stress. This is the most common form of stress, often resulting from immediate demands and pressures. It's short term and is usually associated with situational pressures, like an upcoming deadline or a challenging task. Acute stress can be thrilling and exciting in small doses, but too much can be exhausting. Chronic stress is the type of stress that wears people down over time and occurs when a person cannot see a way out of a distressing situation. It's the stress of unrelenting demands and pressures from seemingly interminable periods. Chronic stress can stem from such things as an unhappy marriage, dysfunctional family, unfulfilling jobs, or poverty. It can be harmful to health and may lead to psychological issues such as depression or anxiety. Episodic acute stress, some people tend to experience acute stress frequently, almost as if their life is a series of crises. They often take on too much, are always running late, and seem to always be in a rush. This type of stress can also manifest in people who worry excessively. Such a lifestyle can lead to tension headaches, hypertension, or heart disease. And then there's eustress. This is a positive form of stress that can feel energizing. It's often associated with surges of adrenaline, such as when completing a challenging task or playing a sport. Eustress helps motivate and focus energy and is perceived as within our coping abilities. Unlike eustress, distress is negative stress. That might feel unpleasant and decrease performance. It can lead to mental and physical problems and is commonly known as just stress. Life history stress. This refers to the cumulative effect of stressors and traumatic events that an individual has encountered over their lifetime. Life stress history can impact current stress responses and overall mental health. Individuals with a history of multiple or severe stressors might be more susceptible to developing mental health conditions, have a heightened stress response, or face difficulties in coping with current stressors. Then we have post traumatic stress or post traumatic stress disorder. For the condition, the disorder, it's a specific type of stress reaction that can develop after exposure to a terrifying event or ordeal in which grave physical harm occurred or was threatened. This can include events such as violent personal assaults, natural or human caused disasters, accidents, or military combat. Symptoms can include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts about the event. As we delve deeper into how stress affects our autistic children, it is important to acknowledge the layering of minority stress. Starting with intersectionality, we recognize that our children do not face challenges in isolation. The overlapping societal factors such as race, gender, and disability intertwine, creating a complex interaction of experiences that can exacerbate stress. An autistic child may not only navigate how their autism interacts with their environment, but also the biases and barriers associated with their racial and cultural identity. Transgenerational factors carry the weight of our family, familial, and cultural histories. Stress and coping mechanisms passed down from our ancestors can influence how our children perceive and respond to their own stressors today. These inherited legacies can be both a source of strength and vulnerability. And then trauma, which is not a standalone event, but a profound experience that can alter the course of development. For autistic children, traumatic events may not be processed or expressed in typical ways, potentially leading to unrecognized and unaddressed stress. There are life events such as birth, death, moving homes, or changing schools that can act as stress catalysts. These events may be particularly challenging for autistic children who often rely on predictability and routine to feel secure. When we consider racial discrimination, we add a societal dimension to personal stress. This form of discrimination can be a daily chronic stressor that affects not only the child, but the entire family unit, influencing access to resources, social support, and community engagement. Adding ableism to racial discrimination magnifies the challenges. Ableism, the discrimination against individuals with disabilities, can create barriers to effective communication, learning, and social integration, further isolating our children and heightening stress. The intersection of racial discrimination, ableism, and sexism underscores that our female autistic children of color may face a triad of biases. These overlapping prejudices can lead to a lack of understanding and support, as their behavior is often misinterpreted through a lens clouded by stereotypes and misinformation. Finally, when poverty intersects with these forms of discrimination, the result can be a formidable obstacle to accessing necessary services and support, compounding the stress experienced by the child and family. In acknowledging these layers of minority stress, we see the importance of a compassionate, holistic approach to support that addresses not just the autism spectrum, but the full spectrum of identity and experience. Our role as caregivers, advocates, and professionals is to create environments that not only understand these intersecting stressors, but actively work to dismantle the barriers they create. All right, now that you're all warmed up from those definitions and examples of stress and stress responses, I'm going to talk about the neurobiology of the subject. This part of today's presentation could provide an explanation as to why we have certain stress profiles. So here's a brief science lesson for the day. The stress response begins in the brain's hypothalamus which is this organ, not very beautifully depicted here, but it's in the image. Uh, so the hypothalamus prompts a cascade of hormonal signals, which starts with the pituitary gland, which is lower in the lower part of our brain, in response to another hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. So then that hormone triggers the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, which then travels through the bloodstream down to the adrenal glands, cueing the release of cortisol into our bloodstream. This cortisol is the hormone that plays an important role in preparing the body to respond to the stressor. Concurrently, or at the same time, the sympathetic nervous system springs into action, increasing our heart rate and blood pressure, priming muscles for action. While back in the brain, the amygdala, which is our emotional center of the brain, gauges the threat level, which can amplify the stress response. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which is the frontal part of our brain, it engages in evaluating the situation, making decisions, and potentially calming the emotional response. This finely tuned system, the prefrontal cortex, allows for a rapid and effective response to immediate stress. Now, when considering autistic people, the neurology of stress responses can present differently. There's going to be some variability in the hypothalamus's activation, which can lead to atypical stress hormone patterns. And there may be a distinct sensitivity to the hormone ACTH and cortisol. The sympathetic nervous system's regulation can also be unique, sometimes resulting in heightened or diminished responses to stress. The amygdala, the emotional center of our brain, may respond more intensely to sensory stimuli, potentially leading to an exacerbated response to stress. And then the prefrontal cortex may encounter difficulties in mediating these responses due to distinct neural pathways or processing that are different in the autistic brain. Furthermore, there's interoception, which is the sense of the internal state of the body, which is a crucial aspect of understanding stress in autistic people. Atypical interoception can influence how stress is perceived and managed, making self regulation and the identification of stressors even more challenging. Acknowledging these neurological differences is essential for tailoring support and interventions for stress management in autistic people. All that said here about potential differences in autistic people need actual research to support these hypotheses. Believe it or not, there is little research on stress and stress responses in autistic people, and this spans across the life stages. There's few research, but not enough, and not on factors that are guided by our community. Okay, moving on to PDA. Let's talk about PDA. Not public display of affection, but pathological demand avoidance. So there's a book titled PDA by PDAers, From Anxiety to Avoidance and Masking to Meltdowns. I hear from several autistic adults that it's worth checking out. It was recommended to me to read, so it is on my wish list and I'm sharing it with you all here. Okay, so pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, is a behavior profile that is increasingly recognized within the autism spectrum. People with PDA exhibit an acute avoidance of mundane demands due to their underlying anxiety. This isn't simple just disobedience, it's a panic driven need to avoid expectations that feel overwhelming. Some key features include resistance to routine demands, reliance on social strategies such as distraction to avoid demands, apparent sociability with challenges to genuine social comprehension, and significant mood fluctuations. Often, people with PDA find solace in role playing where they can exert control in a predictable context. Those with PDA frequently misinterpret social cues and can find deeper social interactions really challenging. Their behavior is not willful defiance, but rather it's an anxiety driven need to escape what they perceive as intolerable pressure. Supporting someone with PDA involves flexibility. Strategies that need to be effective include negotiating tasks, offering choices to provide a sense of control, and adopting a non confrontational approach. It's also crucial to focus on anxiety management, as reducing anxiety can lessen the need for avoidance behaviors. Despite increasing requests for PDA diagnoses, it remains a controversial issue within the clinical community and is still less recognized in many parts of the world, including the United States. Anxiety and intolerance of uncertainty have been proposed as frameworks to understand PDA, with anticipatory responses to uncertainty playing a role in its development and maintenance. So, in understanding PDA, it's very important to recognize that traditional strategies like natural consequences may not be effective. PDA children experience safety differently, where firm boundaries might provide a sense of security for neurotypical children and even for autistic children without PDA. PDA children may perceive these as a loss of control and autonomy, leading to a significant stress response. It's essential to approach boundaries with flexibility, allowing them to ebb and flow with a child's state of regulation, respecting their neurobiological needs. Stable routines, while typically reassuring, can be counterproductive for PDA children if it is perceived as inflexible demands. The PDA child's fundamental need for autonomy and equality can surpass the desire for predictability. A routine that does not allow for their control can quickly become another demand they feel compelled to resist. So, therefore, for PDA children, creating an environment that honors their need for autonomy and acknowledges their unique needs of safety is key. It involves a delicate balance of structure and flexibility, recognizing that for these children, the path to feeling secure is through understanding and respecting their intrinsic need for self determination. Okay, let's talk about stress in autistic people. So, in the context of autism, stress manifests not just in the mind, but profoundly in the body. Sensory sensitivities can transform a bustling classroom or a flickering light into an overwhelming experience, as you all already may know. It can trigger a cascade of stress responses that tax the heart and tighten the muscles. And then there's gastrointestinal distress. And it is common for autistic people to have, irritable bowel symptoms. So GI issues is notably prevalent among autistic people. It can be intensified by stress, causing discomfort and additional health concerns. The immune system, too, may respond erratically as stress disrupts its delicate balance, leading to increased susceptibility to illness. Sleep, a sanctuary for the body's repair processes, is a time when our cells are healing and regenerating, is often elusive for autistic people. Stress aggravates this challenge, disrupting the potential for rest and recovery. The endocrine system, important in managing our metabolic processes, can be thrown into disarray by stress, affecting hunger cues and weight management, which is a concern that often accompanies autism. The physical health of autistic people is intrinsically linked to our stress levels. When we consider the interplay between stress and mental health in autism, we see a complex picture emerge. Anxiety, which is a frequent traveler alongside autism, can reach new heights under the duress of chronic stress, necessitating strategies that are mindful of sensory and communicative differences. Depression can loom much larger in the face of unrelenting stress, with its impact on mood and motivation being particularly detrimental for those with autism who may already feel marginalized. And then there's cognitive functioning, which includes memory and attention. It can also suffer as the demands of a stressful environment overwhelm the executive capacities. This cognitive overload can hinder learning and adaptation to new situations. The quality of sleep, often precarious in autism, can be further compromised by stress, with repercussions that ripple out into daytime behavior and learning. And as the social world becomes even more challenging under stress, the risk of withdrawal grows, potentially leading to deeper isolation and impacting long term mental health. Understanding and mitigating stress in autism is not just about improving quality of life, it's about safeguarding health, promoting learning, and fostering meaningful connections. How can systems of care and support actually help? So, this slide is about strategies for broader implications and a call for systems of care and support to adopt these strategies in each level of these systems. In addressing the stress experienced by autistic people and their families, particularly within communities of color, we must approach with a lens of cultural understanding and responsiveness. It is within the strength of community support networks that parents often find the most solace and practical assistance. These networks can offer not just empathy, but shared wisdom that resonates with our cultural experiences. Therapies that are culturally responsive, can't say that enough. It can bridge the gap between traditional healing practices and modern therapeutic approaches, ensuring that interventions are not just effective, but also culturally congruent. It is also important for families to be equipped with the knowledge to navigate systems of care that may not always recognize the full scope of their experiences or the systemic barriers in place. Advocacy plays a critical role in this context. It's about amplifying voices to ensure that the needs of autistic people from diverse backgrounds are met with policies that ensure equitable access to services and support. Education on stress management must reflect the realities of racism, discrimination, and social determinants of health that disproportionately affect communities of color. Understanding how these factors interplay with autism can empower parents to advocate for their children and foster environments that are nurturing and responsive to their unique support needs. And by adopting these culturally informed strategies, we acknowledge the full spectrum of influences that shape the stress experiences of families of color with autism. And this is not merely about providing support, but about affirming the cultural strengths and resilience that these families embody. As we focus on stress management education for our diverse autism communities, it is important to contextualize stress. Understanding the why behind our stress responses, especially considering the cultural, societal, and family influences, can empower us in our journey of managing it effectively. Central to this education is acknowledging and valuing the cultural coping mechanisms that have passed down through generations. Whether it's through community gatherings, storytelling, music, or spiritual practices, these cultural anchors can be a powerful tool in alleviating stress and fostering communal bonds. Navigating the complex web of social systems can be a significant source of stress, particularly for families of autistic children. I may be preaching to the choir here, but here it is anyway. It's essential to equip parents with strategies to effectively advocate for their child's needs in healthcare, education, and social services, while also managing the stress that comes with confronting systemic barriers. An aspect that cannot be overlooked is the importance of self care for parents. It's not just about taking a break. It's about replenishing your own resources so you can be the best advocate and caregiver for your child. This includes culturally relevant self care practices that resonate with our individual and collective identities. The power of community cannot be underestimated. Building a support network, whether formal or informal, creates a space for shared experiences and mutual support. And these networks can be a wellspring of knowledge, empathy, and resilience, providing both practical and emotional support. So, how can, as we navigate the complexities of stress, we can draw strength from our rich cultural traditions. Our traditions and practices are not just remnants of the past, they are living, breathing mechanisms that offer comfort and connection. Consider the warmth of storytelling. I love storytelling. It's a practice as old as humanity itself. It's a way for families to bond, share stories of resilience, and pass down wisdom that has stood the test of time. It's a reminder that we're part of a larger narrative, one that's imbued with the strength of our ancestors. Take cultural dance, for example. It's a celebration of movement and rhythm that can be both invigorating and soothing. It's a therapeutic tool that transcends language, enabling us to express what words cannot capture. It's a ritual that, when shared with our children, can help instill a sense of cultural identity and pride. Integrating these cultural rituals into our daily lives doesn't have to be complex. It can be as simple as a shared moment of reflection each morning or evening, anchoring us in gratitude and unity. These moments become sanctuaries of calm for both parents and children. By embedding these cultural coping mechanisms into our routines, we honor our heritage while actively nurturing our mental health. These practices become bridges connecting us to our past, grounding us in the present, and then equipping us for the future. In our journey to support our autistic children, we often encounter complex health and educational systems. It's essential to approach these systems armed with strategies that can help mitigate the stress involved because it's quite stressful. Start by being proactive in your interactions with professionals. Come prepared to each meeting or appointment with a list of questions and concerns. After each interaction, take the time to recap the main points in a follow up email. This not only keeps everyone on the same page, but also creates a paper trail that can be invaluable. When it comes to advocacy, the power is in the details. Keep a detailed log of all communications, including phone calls, emails, and in person meetings. This record becomes your advocate in pushing against the systemic barriers that stand, not might, in the way of your child's needs. But just remember you're not alone in this. There are resources within our diverse communities designed to support you, from advocacy training and legal aid to workshops on navigating the educational system. These resources often take into account the cultural and linguistic needs of our communities when connected to the right people. Engage with organizations that understand these nuances and leverage their expertise to bolster your advocacy efforts. Navigating the systems can be challenging, but with the right strategies, resources, and community support, you can become a powerful advocate for your child, ensuring they receive the care and education they deserve. Back to self care, it is an integral part of resilience, especially for parents who dedicate themselves to caring for their autistic children. It's about nourishing your own physical and emotional well being to sustain the energy needed for this important work. Consider starting your day with movement, maybe go for a walk, some stretching, or yoga. These activities not only invigorate the body, but also clear the mind. Pair this with moments of stillness. Deep breathing exercises or relaxation techniques can help you center yourself, amid life's chaos. I offer this advice as these practices have been passed down from my grandmother and her mother before her as a Buddhist. Remember the power of our cultural roots. They offer practices rich in healing and comfort, whether it's through meditation, prayer, or the communal joy found in our cultural celebrations. These practices can provide a profound sense of peace and grounding. Balancing the demands of caregiving with the necessity of self care can be daunting and hard. I know. It's about carving out time, structuring your day so that self care is not just an afterthought, but a scheduled priority, like set an alarm. I have to do that. If possible, collaborate with your support system to make this happen. After all, taking care of yourself isn't a diversion from your responsibilities, it's what makes fulfilling them possible. By adopting these strategies for self care, we do more than just survive the day to day. We cultivate resilience that allows us to thrive and provide the best care for our children. The value of community cannot be overstated. Building and nurturing support networks is not just about finding solutions to shared problems, it's also about emotional sustenance that comes from knowing we're not alone. Imagine the power of sitting with a group of parents who truly get it, who understand the highs and lows of being a parent. These networks become incubators for innovative problem solving and pillars of emotional strength. Beyond the confines of a meeting room, our community groups and events can be vibrant hubs of connection and learning. Whether it's a workshop on navigating educational resources or a family fun day, these gatherings reinforce our collective identity and resourcefulness. The shared experiences in these spaces are more than just stories, they're threads weaving a tapestry of mutual understanding. When we listen and learn from one another, we not only strengthen our own resolve, but also fortify the resilience of our entire community. Throughout our discussion today, we've explored the multifaceted nature of stress and its profound impact on families, especially those navigating the journey of autism. We've recognized the power of community support, the importance of culturally attuned practices, and the need for systemic navigation and advocacy. As we continue to seek ways to empower our children and ourselves at the same time, I want to introduce an opportunity for further engagement and learning. At Children's National Hospital is where I work. We are doing a research study focused on puberty and sexual health education for autistic teens and parents or caregivers. In this study, it's an invitation to dive into the area that is critically important, yet often underserved in our conversations on autism, which is puberty and sexual health education. In understanding and navigating these topics, it can bring about its own set of challenges and stressors for both teens and their caregivers. If your family includes an autistic teen between 14 and 19 years old, or if you're a caregiver to a teen on the autism spectrum, this research study may provide some insights and resources. Your participation involves engaging with an online educational toolkit that is designed to support autistic teens and their parents through the conversations about puberty and sexual health. In addition to contributing to a body of knowledge that will support other families like yours, you'll also have the opportunity to express your thoughts and experiences with the toolkit, helping us to refine and enhance its effectiveness. Families will be compensated for their time and contribution to this research, and the insights that you provide will help shape the future of how we approach these important topics within the autism community. I have here a QR code as well as the link to the study. If you're interested, you can either scan the QR code or click on the link. It'll lead you to a survey to fill out your information, and someone from our research team will contact you to schedule a time to meet with you. And of course, if you have questions, you have my contact information here, so you can reach out to ask some questions. So as I conclude this presentation, I want to thank all of you for your engagement and thoughtful participation. Your insights and experiences are invaluable as we try to foster understanding and support within our communities. Again, if you have questions, you can contact me at either of these email addresses. The top one is my personal email, and the bottom was my work email. Or you can learn more about my work at www.jennymaiphan.com. Reach out because I am always open to collaboration with people within our communities, and your voice matters, and I would like to amplify that in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phan, for this wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions in the chat, and the first one is asking, can you talk about how the community can get involved in research studies to bring lived experiences into clinical practice? I think specifically around stress in autism.
So that's a really important question, and one that I'm sad to say there's just not enough opportunities, research opportunities like that's available that I know of. I'm always searching for those kinds of research opportunities because I'd like to participate in them personally with my family and my own experiences. What I'm trying to do right now in the autism research field is really put a spotlight on how important this is, the topic of stress for autistic children and teens, as well as stress in the family, and how that's really a unit. It's not just the individual, because a lot of the stress literature in autism really focuses on parent stress. We know a lot about parent stress from research, but we really don't know enough about autistic children, their stress, and how that interacts with their family, and then how that ends up playing out in like their clinical outcomes, like depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress. So I'm doing my best to put a spotlight on this. One of the things I'm doing right now is collaborating with some other researchers to call for researchers to conduct these studies. So if you follow me on my website, you may start to see some of that work.
Thank you. Another question from the chat is, are there groups that you recommend for stress or general groups? Any recommendations there or a URL that we can point folks to?
Not any off the top of my head. I know there are a lot of nonprofit organizations, local ones especially, that are really, really good at disseminating those kinds of resource that is grounded in the community that you're in. So I know xMinds has a series, right, that Daria can point you to. Um, and if you ask me more specifically based on your location, I promise I will follow up and try to get you local resources because I find those to be most informative. Those big nonprofit organizations have like general advice. Some are helpful. Some people find them less helpful because they can't relate to it locally.
Thank you. I actually do have a question about the types of responses to stress, the 4 buckets that you shared early on. To one of the questions that you posed, I mean, I saw myself across all 4. I don't know what that means. But I mean, is that possible? Is there usually a more dominant one? And what does that say, I guess, about the person who may be experiencing all these different things? Even some of our kids may experience some of these things in different ways. So I'm just curious, going back to your question about the different responses.
Yeah,
Also,
it isn't it interesting that like we can actually respond to stress in all 4 forms and not just one or two. And it because educational information like this on stress tend to pick one, right? And that's how it's presented to us, but it's rarely presented to us as you can actually respond to stress in all 4 of these ways. And Daria, like not just as parents, but our kids too could be on one day be in fight mode, on another day be a flight mode, right? Or sometimes throughout the entire day, you can see all 4 forms of stress responses. So that I would absolutely call on the research field to do this study so we can better understand why that happens, because then that helps us with stress regulation and coping. I mean, it's great for us to recognize the type of stress responses that we typically engage in, but why does that happen? Why do I engage in, I think fun was a very popular one that I saw on the poll. Like, why do we engage in fawn a lot more than the other ones? And then in what context? So I think that's just me putting out to the field, but I may be preaching to the choir here.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. Any recommendations for families with a stressed child who copes with it via consistent physical aggression against a parent? And I know that you're saying that there's definitely more work to be done around this issue. Curious if this might be like a fight response, and if so, how has it typically been handled, I guess, on the neurotypical side, or are there some coping mechanisms for that that we can share?
Yeah, so there's a book that comes to mind. I don't know who asked the question, and maybe you've heard of it already and read it. But if not, The Explosive Child. I don't know if you've heard of that book. That so my husband and I, we started reading that because we were experiencing this too, and we were trying to figure out like this is a stress response, but what do we do as a parent response to that? And I think that there were some really helpful strategies in that book. It's not a very long read, but um, it and also wasn't written for autistic children or teens, but it does address the behaviors we're talking about here. Um, but I think the first step is correct. Recognize why, what type of stress response that is, and so you're in the right direction. And then the next is, as you stated, looking for strategies, and I think that book might be helpful. I'm going to put the link in the chat for everyone here.
I just dropped it in there, so very long
Oh,
Amazon
okay.
link,
Thank you.
but hopefully that works. Thank you. Um, do we have any, and I did re-up the teen research interest form in the chat as well. Any other questions for Dr. Phan?
Can you put the address for the teen research again?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah, I think Daria just put it in the chat, but I'll put it in again.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Dr. Phan, when do you think PDA will be more recognized here in the US? It seems like we are sort of late to the game on that one, and not as many clinicians recognize it.
Yeah, I totally agree about how the US is pretty late to this work. Um, if it's not being researched in the US, it's also not really addressed clinically too. And right, yeah, we know that the UK, the United Kingdom, is really the central hub for this information. They have a nonprofit organization, the National Autistic Society, and there are some others that I can't think of off the top of my head that also has some really great resources on PDA. So I'm going to send them to Daria, or anyone who wants to know, please reach out to me and I can email them to you, the list of resources that comes out of the United Kingdom, but we're not going to find them in the US, unfortunately, not yet. And to answer your question, I know there's a group of researchers in Michigan who's beginning to look into PDA. I know they submitted a grant to study PDA, but I don't know if they've been funded.
Thank you so much.
One other question that I just wanted to pose is just different characteristics of stress. I don't know if stuttering has ever been associated directly with stress. You know, if your
Yeah.
child suddenly starts to stutter or has historically stuttered. If you have any thoughts there, that would be great.
Yeah, we typically hear about stuttering being tied to nervousness if it kind of comes on in the moment, right? But if stuttering is more persistent, then it's usually diagnosed as a speech disorder. And so that has to do with, the communication centers of the brain and how that looks different in its connections and why persistent stuttering may happen. But for people who don't stutter all the time, but they stutter like when giving a talk, for example, that is tied to performance anxiety. And so that taps into, the sympathetic nervous system being activated, and then it could throw things off kilter within our bodily system, and then it impairs speech.
Hi, my name is José Sepulveda, and I'm a little bit more interesting about that. My daughter, when she got through one of those responses, like for example, the fight response, I will say she can talk at any word. Like she gets so stressed that she just go mute, and it's hard because she's verbal, thank God she's verbal, but when she is in that moment, like in the tantrum moment, there's no word that come out from her mouth, and it's very frustrated because I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, selective mutism comes to my mind in those
Okay.
situations. Are you familiar with that concept?
No, this is the first time that I heard something like that.
Okay, so there's some really good readings about selective mutism and autism where it does tie that behavior to stress and anxiety. And it doesn't have a lot of research on like the biological mechanisms of that, but it does explain, like antecedents, like behaviors that or things that happen before the child um, becomes, just becomes mute, doesn't want to speak when they are, speaking normally. Um, so if you want to know more, I'm happy to send you some information about
Okay.
selective mutism.
Sure. I will follow up with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, please. Thank you.
We also have some good sharing going on in the chat. Thank you, Bronte, for flagging the program in the UK. And like Dr. Phan said, that we will pull together the resources shared from this presentation in our follow-up email to everyone. So that will be forthcoming. Any other questions for Dr. Phan before we wrap up for the evening? Dr. Phan, any last words before I give a quick update on the xMinds programming for December?
Just, I appreciate everyone being here, taking the time out of your busy schedule. And if you're in Eastern time, thank you for staying on so late. And I want to say, if you didn't think of a question to ask, but it comes up later, please email me. I'm very responsive in email, and I'm very happy to connect and answer questions. So please email me.
Dr. Phan, actually, we do have, I think, 2 more questions that just popped in the
Yeah,
chat.
sure.
Can someone have autism and selective mutism? I think you were answering that question earlier.
So I know that selective mutism typically in, say, the DSM, um, it's listed as if you're diagnosed with autism, you cannot be diagnosed with selective mutism. There's new work, new research that's coming out right now that's arguing against that because we're starting to understand a little more about why speaking autistic people would enter into selective mutism. Right now, the DSM-5 is the way that it is, and clinical providers are going to not diagnose an autistic person with selective mutism because it's not in their clinical training to do that. but there's emerging research that is suggesting that needs to change. So that's a really good and important question. Thank you for asking.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying. And I think one more question around mean-spirited behavior is an indication of stress. In a 5-year-old was acting very aggressively toward her grandmother, and just ways to address this sort of behavior. This may go back to
Yeah.
your suggestion about the explosive child book.
Right. 5-year-old is tough. I remember that. My son's older now, but I do remember that age being pretty tough. Um, and so, yeah, it is I can't say that it is a stress response because I don't know or see the behavior to identify it that way. Much of the time, it usually is a stress response. Um, and if it's aggression, I think it is worth reading Explosive Child to learn some strategies. Like it flipped the way I think about so many behaviors when I read this book. So I hope you can find it and find some help with it.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Phan, for your time, and thank you all, our community, for joining us today. I want to highlight 2 upcoming events. Both of them are actually happening tomorrow, session 2 of the Holiday Survival Guide for Parents. And then in the evening tomorrow, we have a panel talk on, is this autism a framework for understanding? So we hope that you all will continue to join us and to be informed, and to share, questions that may be helpful to throw out to some of our guest speakers, as we try to provide insights, research, and helpful tidbits to help you, help you manage and navigate autism. So with that said, I think this is going to be our last BIPOC discussion group for the year. Wishing everyone a happy and warm holiday season. But please, our programming is continuing for a few more days, so continue to tune in and participate if you can. And again, another warm thanks to Dr. Phan for her time and all of her great insights on stress on the spectrum. Thank you so much for joining us.